The Apple Cup is going to determine who plays USC in the Pac-12 Championship. If Washington State beats Washington, it's all theirs. But if they lose, then Stanford gets the go-ahead.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most interesting Apple Cups. There have been definitely between two of the highest-ranked Washington teams we've seen in definitely recent history, one of the highest ones since either one of us have been alive.
Washington has been compared to an almost Alabama-like team on the West Coast for the Pac-12. They're mechanical. They win games by having the best defense and an offense that will run through you and take advantage of you in the play-action pass. But in order to be successful, as they have been, you've got to play smart, and they do just that. They limit the mistakes, which these players have been doing the past 2 years extremely well. They had a great run last year. This is one of the best 2-year spurt they've had in their history. And defense has been a big key for all of this. Once in a blue moon do we see a Pac-12 team put out a good defense, and this is definitely one of those teams. They limit the rushing yards to less than 103, which won't help them all too much against Falk, but the secondary consists of some strong players as well who have broken up passes, played tight coverage, and rarely let their man out of sight, only giving up 168 yards per game. Simple as that, they just have to keep it up.
And just to throw this out there, we're not the Big 12. We do actually play defense, I promise. We might have those high-scoring games, but we're not as bad as the Big 12. Washington State, though, they also have a surprisingly good defense, especially for a Washington State team. Their pass defense is a big part of that. They don't necessarily have the best run defense. They're not the most physical, but their secondary and their pass defense has really helped them a lot this year. They're able to control the air in general, whether it's on punting the ball. They have arguably the best punt returner in college football history. Pettis currently has the record for most punt returns for touchdowns. Passing the ball on offense, they have a ton of explosive plays. They currently have 8 players that have averaged over 10 yards of reception, and they have 10 players that have over 100 receiving yards on the season. And then just passing in general. Mike Leach, a guy who never really played football at a very competitive level, and Luke Falk have completely revolutionized this offense and just the passing game in general. They've created one of the most impressive passing offenses we've seen in recent history, and they've done it with 1, 2, and maybe a couple 3-star recruits in there, which is just absolutely amazing. This offense has been one of the most dynamic and interesting offenses to watch because they can't run the ball at all. So you know what they're going to do every single time. You know they're going to pass the ball, and you still can't stop them.
One thing Washington State doesn't have on its side, though, is history in this rivalry, and history is known for repeating itself, which is bad news for the Cougs, who trail behind in this overall series with only 31 wins compared to the Huskies' 71 wins. And right now, the Huskies have a 4-game win streak in this rivalry going on, but that could all change this year. The secondary is not the best for the Cougs. They give up 174 yards per game, and Washington State is going to be looking to get behind that. Jake Browning is a pretty accurate passer, rarely makes mistakes. As long as his receivers can get open and down the field quick enough, the Cougs might be struggling here.
Yeah, Washington has struggled a lot this year, though. Not necessarily a lot, but they've struggled a lot against teams that apply a lot of pressure and are able to get a lot of pressure in the backfield. The first half really against Oregon, they struggled quite a bit on offense. They had a few 3-and-outs really early, and then when Oregon's offense stalled consistently, Washington just took over, and that's why the score looked as bad as it did. But their 2 losses come against Stanford, who is the most physical team they've played all year, and Arizona State, who blitzes more than any team in the entire Pac-12. So pressure has really gotten to these Huskies, and Jake Browning doesn't have that elite receiver on the outside like he did last year when they made that college football playoff run. And their schedule is pretty bad. They've played physical teams, but as hard as it is to believe playing that Pac-12 schedule, this will be the first ranked team that Washington has played all year. And when you consider the fact that they've lost 2 games to unranked teams, it's pretty embarrassing. Both of the teams that they lost to have been in and out of the top 25 all season, though, but at the time of the loss, they were not in the top 25.
Well, one guy Browning does have is Myles Gaskin. No one on the offense compares to this man, who has almost 1,100 rushing yards on the season for 15 touchdowns. but he also likes to show off those hands, adding an additional 228 receiving yards to his name with 3 touchdowns, placing him in the top 5 of the receiver corps.
It's impossible to talk about Washington State without talking about the leader of their offense, the leader of that passing attack, and that's Luke Falk. He has the most completions in Pac-12 history. He has the second highest completion percentage in the Pac-12 this year. He's 3rd in yards, 1st in touchdowns. He's creeping up on multiple NCAA records, especially after their bowl game. It'll be really interesting to see where he stands as far as a career standpoint goes as a passer. And he's looking to make that last statement win in the regular season to really get NFL scouts on his side and raise that draft stock.
Last year, I feel like Washington was a lot more in the talks nationally. And this year, I think it's the other way around. Washington State has earned that overall hype that Washington had last year. They've kind of like, even though they're in the top 15, they haven't really been talked about much this season.
No, Washington, they're, as you said earlier, they are fairly similar to Alabama. No one really talks about them. You know, they do what they do. They win their games. They just go on. They don't produce a lot of highlights. They win, and that's it.
I'm looking for Washington State to come in, take control of this game. They control their own destiny at this point, so a win here is going to propel them that extra step to play USC. And I see Luke Falk getting in there and getting the job done.
Yeah, and if the Pac-12 really wants any hope of winning or getting into the college football playoff, they need Washington State to win to get in, and they need either Washington State or USC to, have an impressive performance in that Pac-12 championship game and another impressive performance this week in rivalry week. I also I look at Washington State to take control of this game early. I also just don't like Washington, but I expect Washington State to come out on top and try and make a statement win as much as they possibly can to try and get into the top 10 nationally for a last little push for a Pac-12 team in the college football playoff.